Hi there! In today's video, we're going to be going over some common misconceptions about coarse hair. If you're new here, my name is Michelle. I'm a licensed hairstylist with over 20 years of experience, and on this channel I use those 20 years of experience to help you have healthy, happy hair. So before we start talking about the misconceptions about coarse hair, let's talk about what it means to have coarse hair. So coarse is the texture, meaning whether or not your hair is fine or coarse, and that is in reference to the size of the diameter of your individual hair strands. It has absolutely nothing to do with how your hair feels. And that brings me to the first biggest misconception about coarse hair, is that coarse means rough. So these two words, rough and coarse, have kind of become synonymous, and maybe they are when in regards to other things, but when we're talking hair, what we're talking about with coarse hair has nothing to do with how it actually feels, has everything to do with the size of the individual hair strands. If you have coarse hair, when you go to take one of your individual hair strands and you roll it around in your fingers, you'll be able to very easily feel it, and you are also able to very easily see each individual strand with the naked eye. So if you're on the very opposite of the spectrum with very fine hair, you will not be able to feel your individual hair strands in between your fingers. And it will also be extremely difficult to see each individual hair strand with the naked eye. So, and then you can have anything in between there. There's a lot of people typically use fine, medium, and coarse, but it's actually a spectrum, and you can be anywhere in between the three of those. So you can have hair that's somewhere in between medium and fine. You can have hair that's between medium and coarse. It can be all over the place, and you can have several different textures on your one head. That happens a lot too. My daughter has a spot that's finer than the rest. I have a spot that's finer than the rest. It's actually my straight hair that's at the nape and the back. Which brings me to another misconception about coarse hair, is that coarse hair and curl type is related, or that your curl type is determined by how coarse your hair is, or that coarse hair determines how curly your hair is. And this one I don't see as much, but I do see it kind of being pushed together. And there are a lot of products out there for wavy haired people that are more compatible with fine hair wavies, not so much with coarse hair wavies. My daughter is a coarse hair wavy. I used to be a coarse hair wavy. So my hair is the perfect example of the coarseness of your hair not dictating your curl pattern or having anything to do with it, because my hair as a kid, my hair has always been coarse, aside from when I was a baby. And when I was a kid, my hair was completely stick straight until probably about puberty. It got wavy. And then, into my teens, it kept getting wavier. And then throughout my 20s, and then in my 30s, I started noticing that I was getting curls and some spirals. They were looser curls and spirals. And then now my hair is just continuously getting curlier as I get older. So I actually have more curls now than waves, but I still have some waves. And I still have straight pieces underneath. Every single one of these strands, for the most part, is coarser, on the coarser end of the spectrum. So even the hair that I said was a little bit finer is still coarse in general. It's just finer than some of my other hair. So the next misconception is probably one that I see as being the most problematic, and that's the one where it's recommended that coarse-haired people stay away from protein, that their hair is protein sensitive, that their hair can't handle the protein, that it'll get protein overload, a whole bunch of things like that. And that's just not necessarily true. How much protein your hair needs actually has more to do with your porosity than it does with your hair's texture. So as your porosity changes, your needs for protein and moisture are going to change as well. And your needs for protein and moisture can change even on a daily basis, just kind of depending on what's going on in the environment or what you're doing with your hair or the stylers that you're using. So, and then when it comes to protein sensitivity, I talked about this in my protein moisture balance video, and I have an issue with the term protein sensitivity just because, first of all, your hair is dead. It can't be sensitive to anything. In much the same way that your wood furniture can't be sensitive to something. It's not sensitive to water, it's just that water can damage it. And then there are oils and stuff that can protect wood. And your hair is the same way. It's not sensitive. It's some things can damage it and other things can protect it and condition it and keep it in good shape. So it's the same thing here. Your hair is not living. It can't have a sensitivity. Not to mention it is made out of protein. Your hair is protein. And therefore, I mean, it kind of doesn't make sense that it would be sensitive to itself because it is protein. So that's my issue with protein sensitivity. And then coarse hair in general is no more likely to respond poorly to protein than any other hair type. And like I said, this tends to rest mostly on your porosity and not so much your texture, and texture meaning fine versus coarse. And it's actually, this misconception about protein is probably one of the main reasons why I'm making this video, is because so many people, I think, get told that and then they avoid protein and then they have issues with their hair and they can't figure out why, and they're trying to dump a ton of moisture into it and it's not getting any more moisturized. Well, you need protein to add to the strength and structure of your hair in order for it to hold on to the moisture. So if you're only putting in moisture and never putting in at least a little bit of protein, your hair isn't going to be able to hang on to that moisture if it doesn't have enough strength and structure. So if you're out there and you have coarse hair and you've been avoiding protein because you're afraid of protein sensitivity or protein overload, but you keep dumping more and more moisture into your hair, but it doesn't feel any better, try just a touch of protein. I always say start with a small amount and go from there and add more to it. Now on to the next myth or misconception, whatever you want to call it, about coarse hair, and that's coarse hair is frizzier. Not necessarily. So frizz is determined by a number of different things, and one of those is whether or not your hair is curly or wavy. That is the biggest determining factor in whether or not you're going to have frizz. And then after that, the condition your hair is in. So porosity has a lot to do with how frizzy or less frizzy your hair is going to be. And then your climate. So if you're in a humid climate, you're far more likely to experience a greater amount of frizz than those of us living in a drier climate are going to. So those are the factors that come into play with frizz. It's not about how coarse your hair is or how fine your hair is. But here is why it seems like coarse hair is frizzier than finer hair. So again, we're going back to the diameter of your individual hair strands. So if coarse hair is extremely visible to the naked eye because of how large it is, and fine hair is pretty much invisible to the naked eye because of how fine it is, it's just that the fine hair is actually less visible, so it takes more frizz for it to actually be seen, versus my hair where my individual strands are huge and I have dark hair, so I can have actually less frizz, but it looks like more frizz because it's actually more visible. So just think about if you took a spool of very fine, super thin, tiny silk thread, like you can barely even see it, and you took a bunch of it off the spool and rolled it up into a ball, tossed it over your shoulder, grabbed some upholstery thread, did the same thing, pulled a bunch off of the spool, brought it up into a ball, tossed it over your shoulder, and then you turn around to see where these went. You're likely going to see the upholstery thread before you see the thread that is really super fine and is silk thread, especially if it's fine and light colored versus coarse and darker colored. It's just more visible. So it's not that coarser hair has more frizz than any other hair type or any other hair texture. It's just that you can see it better. Now, that doesn't mean that somebody with coarse hair can't have really frizzy hair because of all of the other conditions mentioned above. It just means that because you have coarse hair, you don't automatically have frizzier hair than everybody else. So it's just a visibility thing. But like I said, there are a lot of factors that come into play with frizz and just hair in general. So any of these things that are attributed to coarse hair can be true, but aren't necessarily true all across the board and are usually attributed to other factors and not how coarse or fine your hair is. One last misconception about coarse hair, and that is that coarse hair is dull. Coarse hair is not automatically dull. I think the reason why this comes up is because of the equating it with being rough. And now rougher hair would be dull. However, coarse hair, as in the diameter of the individual hair strands, is not necessarily. And this comes back to the condition of your cuticle, your porosity, whether or not your hair is healthy or not healthy. The healthier it is, the more shine it's going to have. And actually with coarse hair, because it has a larger surface area than fine hair, it can actually reflect more light than fine hair can. So if I've helped some of you out there or cleared up a few things, then I have definitely achieved my goal. If you like this video, please go ahead and hit that like button. If you'd like to see more content like this, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell while you're at it. If you have any questions or any comments, or if there's anything that you'd like to see, please go ahead and leave that down below in my comment section. And as always, thank you for watching. Bye.